Welcome, travelers. I'm Josh.
I'm Glen.
And I'm Lewanika. And this is Tabletop Journeys, where we will be your not-so-humble guides on the quest for RPG adventures.
Here at Tabletop Journeys, we are all devoted role players and storytellers at heart, and we absolutely love sharing our passion with you. On our show, we feature diverse tabletop RPG systems, demonstrating them through actual plays and breaking down the rules to provide you with tips, tools, and techniques to help you navigate them. We also love bringing the content creators behind these games into the studio to give you a peek behind the curtain with relevant and insightful interviews.
Let us help you get the most out of your story, no matter what game world or system you're playing, because detailed settings, heroic characters, diverse NPCs, and a focus on story over rules can make any campaign legendary. Now, here's a message from friends of the show.
What if I told you there is a world where not only are monsters like vampires and werewolves real, but they have rights, just like you and me. And in this world, there exists a secret government organization dedicated to keeping you safe and making sure they follow the rules. Welcome to Anarium, a Monster of the Week podcast. Each episode, you will follow the story of 3 agents of Anarium, played by Rob Hamilton, Taylor Catron, and Cameron Baker, as they navigate through the treacherous world that Game Master Samuel Herbert has imagined for them. Tune in on Spotify, iTunes, or whatever your preferred podcast platform is. It's dangerous out there, folks, so remember, leave the monster hunting to us, the professionals.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tabletop Journeys. I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts, the 2 people in this world who keep me relatively sane and on target and on track talking about role-playing games. The one, the only Mr. Lewanika Miller, the one Mr. Glen Myers. Gentlemen, how the heck are you? Happy Thursday. Not normally our night to record, but yeah, how the heck are you?
A subtle difference in the changing of the words. There is definitely a different implication, and I'm trying really hard to decide whether or not I should be offended, just so you're aware, Josh. I'll let you know later.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when somebody described me as both outstanding and standing out. You know?
Oh, I don't mind being a standout. I like being a standout.
I don't mind at all either. Yeah, but
depends
those 2,
on what I'm standing out for.
That's fair.
The guy who forgot to wear pants to school today, that's different. Everybody's had that.
Well, I think the people in the audience need to understand this is a fundamental difference in the way that Glenn and I both took that statement. When you were saying that, Glenn, and you're talking about standing out at school for not wearing pants, my thought was, but I don't want to be the guy standing out when I'm on the firing line, right? Very similar.
Mine was just less dire.
Yeah, mine went violent in a hurry.
Good to see you too, Josh. Yeah, and it's having a great day. It was beautiful down here in North Carolina, where I still am. Nice. I know I said I was moving, but I really am on Saturday. But no, I had a great time digging into the material for today's episode, and I got to say, it was not at all what I expected.
Nope. And there's a lot of it. We'll get into all of that in a minute. How about you, Mr. Miller? How are things in beautiful, wonderful, otherwise beginning with a C, Connecticut?
I am really excited. I have had a really great gaming week. I'm having a pretty good week in so many ways. But this week I had the opportunity just last night to record with Bill Barato, of the Final Frontiersman, talking about Star Trek, STA, the whole Star Trek Adventures, sharing some of my insights. It was pretty much an interview show. Once that's released, we'll definitely let our audience know so they can check that out. I love Bill's show. When we first got started with Star Trek Adventures, it was one of the shows I watched very frequently on YouTube to learn what I needed to learn to feel comfortable running the game. And it was really cool that, one, I got that opportunity because Al Spader said to Bill about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, hey, you should have Lewanika on the show, which was amazing. Thank you, Al. And two, it was really cool that Bill, somebody I learned parts of the game from, said, hey, Lewanika, can you share some of your insights? Because the things I hear, the things you talk about are very cool. The things that you and Josh do are very cool. And I really want to get a sense of how that works and see what I can apply to my games and what my audience can start using. I just love the STA community, our connections with the STA community, and just really fulfilled. And it just energized me because I'm going into a convention this weekend as well to run some more. So really looking forward to it.
Just actually got done recording episode 3 of Star Trek Preservations, which is my first episode of this season. And Glenn, I won't speak for you, but man, did I have an awful lot of fun running through this episode. I felt like it went very swimmingly. I can't wait for this to come out because it's an information dump episode, right? It's one of those episodes where it's you guys learned a lot, and
but in a dramatic way.
In a dramatic way, exactly. With much fanfare and with some interesting consequences throughout the evening. So really excited to see how this episode plays out. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed playing in it because I had a whole lot of fun writing it, and I thought it went very well.
I did enjoy it. It was a good time.
So anyway, enough talk about STA. Let's go ahead and get into what we're going to be talking about tonight. Really exciting, and without much fanfare kind of leading up to it. We knew that it was coming when all of a sudden Darrington Press dropped a massive amount of playtest material for Daggerheart. Daggerheart version 1.2 dropped, I don't know, about a week and a half ago now before we were recording the episode, which is honestly why we were recording it a couple days late, so that we could take some time to go ahead and digest the huge amount of material that they put in here. The playtest manuscript is 377 pages.
Right. Partially digest.
It's a lot. Exactly. Partially digest. Exactly. That's totally fair. So tonight, the three of us are going to take some time and talk about 6 things that we learned and saw in this playtest material that we want to go ahead and talk about. Because there's a lot. We're definitely not going to go ahead and talk about everything. That would be 4 or 5 episodes worth of material. Darrington Press, if you would like to go ahead and come on the show and talk about Daggerheart, hashtag call your boys TTJ, we are more than welcome to accommodate any of you who would like to come on and talk about the books in more detail.
And willing to. We're not just welcome to do it. We're willing to do it.
Willing to. Absolutely. Whatever you would like to go ahead and do. Tonight, we're going to go ahead and talk about what we have found in the books so far. Gentlemen, I think that it is time. We're going to do this traditional initiative styles. Fan roll dice to the ready. Let's see what happens here.
Big money, no whammies.
I am not first.
Look, I know we were going to do this by initiative roll, but let me pose a question here. Should we maybe, because it's Daggerheart, be rolling 2d12?
Except there's not an initiative in Daggerheart, so...
There's really not an initiative, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
And the GM still rolls a d20.
Yeah.
Although on that 2d12 front, quick shout out to Michael Ross. D12s are his favorite die type ever. That's why he based Action 12 Cinema around it, so he should be pleased.
Very excited. I have my copy of Action 12 Cinema in my hot little hands. Congratulations, Michael.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yep. So I am not going first. I rolled a big fat 2.
I got a 19, by the way.
Okay.
And I think you and I are rolling off because I also rolled a 19.
What? Okay, this is amazing. Wait, so you guys both got 19s. I got a 2, so I'm clearly going last. Amazing that you guys both rolled 19s. Have at it.
Yep.
On the reroll, I've got a 15.
Looks like Glen is going first.
All right, Mr. Myers. The microphone is yours, sir. Have at it.
Okay. So, Daggerheart. What can I say? The first thing I'll start with is, based on what I've read so far, I'm freaking excited. It was not at all what I expected. I was really expecting something closer to a 5e clone, but that's not what this is at all. Okay. And we started out talking about there's too much to do. It's a really big playtest document. Let's start with character creation. But even just that, because the mechanics are different enough, took a lot of reading. And we had to go fairly into the mechanics themselves as well to understand the characters too. But that's the piece that I'm going to focus on for my start, because the big takeaway for me, the biggest, most exciting thing that they're rolling out is a medium narrative heavy rules light system. They didn't go all the way powered by the apocalypse, but there's heavy powered by the apocalypse tones in the way that they changed it. But they didn't stay all the way towards a 5e, not quite reality generator, but pretty crunchy. That they're shooting for the middle ground. So the most intriguing change right off the bat is to go from the class structure that we're used to in 5e, keeping similar names, not the same, but similar for class types and subclasses, still having subclasses. But aside from that, switching more to a playbook style character sheet like Powered by the Apocalypse, where everyone is unique to the class that they're going to have. But then instead of just limiting it to playbook moves, this is branching out into a second piece, but there's no other way to talk about it. The abilities are all chosen from decks of cards that have to do with your classes. So you're kitting together your playbook's abilities below this master playbook. And I'm sure as we talk about other differences, we'll probably, maybe depending on what we choose, go a little bit more in depth into some of them. But as an example, one of the ways they tackled large numbers of hit points and throwing out handfuls of damage dice that you get from 5e that everybody loves. I did 48 damage. Yeah! On a Powered by the Apocalypse character sheet where you're crossing off bubbles, there aren't 48 bubbles for health points, right? And there aren't on theirs. Instead, what you've got is a set of hit points that starts at 6 for the Ranger as an example and can be increased up to 12. And that's it. So how do they do this, you ask? They created minor, major, and severe wound categories where those damage dice that you roll and you get your 48 and you scream and holler and you're so excited is going to tell you where it lands in the damage scale. So a high damage hit like that is going to count as severe and cost 3 hit points, which is a big number when you've only got 6 to 12, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if it lands in the major category, you're only going to take out 2 hit points. And if it lands in the minor category, you're only going to mark off 1 hit point. So that's just like an example of how they're taking the big numbers from a game like 5e and keeping the joy of those mini dice, but scaling it down to something more simplified for the actual tracking on the character sheet. Although while that sounds simplified, other parts of it sound a little bit more complex with some of the tracking tokens and things like that, but that's not specifically part of the character sheet and what I'm talking about right now. But I'm super, super excited to play Daggerheart with Powered by the Apocalypse, not quite that loose, but narrative over rules, play style, and the duality dice, which I'm sure we'll wind up talking about in a minute, but and the way that the fear and hope mechanic works to give the currencies that let the game run, which I'm sure we'll also talk about, so I won't dive all the way into them. I am super excited to run Daggerheart, and I might even run it as a playtest instead of waiting for it to be completed.
Totally agree with you. I love the way that these rules are laid out. I like the point that you made about the fact that it tries to be rules light in the way that it is structured, even though it's got a lot of complexity to them. And I think maybe why we don't feel it to be so complex is that we deal with a lot of different game systems. So we have exposure to a lot of varying rule sets and stuff like that. We have seen complicated rule sets, like Against the Dark Master, stuff like that, really thick rule sets. I don't think I found this rule set to be particularly complicated or thick, but I can see how someone coming from exclusively a Dungeons and Dragons rule set mindset might see it as complicated because there's a lot of things to it.
Yeah, so you're onto something there, and I think it'll come up a lot in the points we're going to be talking about throughout this evening, but you're correct. We have a lot of experience with a lot of game systems. Glenn and I have done Palladium for most of our adult and teenage lives, right? So
great example. Yeah.
Like I can do
that one's complicated.
Yeah, I can do a Palladium character sheet in almost any Palladium system in under 15 minutes and knock it out of the park and be done. Where most people, that average is probably in the 30 minutes to 45-minute range. And for new people, it can be an hour, right? So for me, there are things that I'm just used to. We also have a fair amount of familiarity 3.5 years in with the podcast with Powered by the Apocalypse. So the tones of Powered by the Apocalypse that are part of the playbooks, and part of that concept of you're doing this overall thing, you're checking the boxes for the things you're adding to this is all there. While that combined with some of the D&D sensibilities and the card mechanics is where I think the complexity comes in. From a player perspective, this is not overly complex. From a game master perspective, I think there are some nuances and rough patches that you'll have to get through, but that's why it's in playtest. That's why there are going to be thousands of podcasts and YouTube videos. However, talk to us first. We got you.
I'm halfway through the GM sections. I'll throw out an update later.
Fair enough. So one of the things I think of when I think about playing games, is this a game I want to play? Is this a game I want to run? A great game, a lovely game, a wonderful game that I absolutely 100% enjoyed, that I really didn't have a particular interest in running, was Aliens. Two reasons for that. One, Josh, you ran it so friggin' well that's a mountain I'm not ready to climb.
Yeah.
But also, I really so felt how great it was to be a character in that world that I just wanted to be in a character space for that.
Yep.
And I will love and enjoy that. I think with Daggerheart, I'm in a similar spot. The narrative elements that I'm going to talk to when it's my turn to go into one of my things out of our total 6, I'll go into it, but that's what I want to play. I'm not so sure this is the game that I would do best at running, but it is absolutely a game that I'm going to love the hell out of playing, and that's absolutely okay. We have a great group of people that we play with on a regular basis. I don't need to run every game, and it's perfectly okay if I run these games, somebody else runs these games, Glen and a few others want to run Daggerheart, because then we all get all the coolness and we all get to enjoy it.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Miller, might as well roll right into your pick for what you took away from Daggerheart.
Yeah, so the first thing I took away from Daggerheart is what I was just speaking on and leaning into, which is those heavy Powered by the Apocalypse tones. And I'm speaking specifically about the character building stuff. So when going into this discussion, my ability to research was I watched several videos about it, read portions of the material, but most importantly, I went to Demiplane and built a character. First of all, Demiplane, wonderful, great site. I built a character in about 7 to 8 minutes, got everything all done with the exception of one section. That's the section I'm about to shout out and celebrate with you all, and loved it. It was very explanatory. It made sense. It flowed in logical order, and I understood what I was doing. May not understand how the numbers work together, but I have a real strong sense of the character that I was building. That's powerful when building a game for a new player, whether they're new to role playing or new to a system. If they have a good sense of where this is heading, at the end of building a character, they're going to enjoy it more. So I think that's wonderful. The thing specifically about the character builder built that I really loved was the role playing questions. And it wasn't set answers. It was just set questions. Love it. Love it.
To help you develop your character, yes,
it
absolutely.
Is effectively collaborative world building, a la the Traveler's Guide to Collaborative World Building.
Yep.
For your character.
Yeah.
Good Lord, that's amazing.
Absolutely.
And to double down on how cool that is in a straight, beautiful send-up of Powered by the Apocalypse, and specifically the game where it showed up the most for me, which was Monsters of the Week, thank you, Glen, is the links to other players. That's the only section of the character I didn't do because we don't have a game that we're putting together right yet, so I don't have any characters I can link it to, but my character is now saved on Demiplane and ready to go. When you're ready to run Daggerheart, I have a character. The only thing we really want to do at that point is I'll get into answering those questions about linking them with other players at the table. When GMs sit down with their players to do a session 0 and get ready for a Daggerheart mini campaign, full campaign, one shot, whatever the case may be, and they have those discussions, that link to other players at the table to reinforce the social contract is going to be made more powerful because it's part of building the character.
Yep.
The fact that it's there tells you the importance of it. Sean Merwin and Teos Abadia on Mastering Dungeons talk frequently about when games are at their best is when the mechanics tell the narrative and where the narrative is improved by the mechanics.
Yep.
In all the things I do, I love narrative and I love story. This is one of the most powerful tools towards that, and I'm here for it.
Yep. I will add on to what you said a little bit when you talked about how strong the PBTA references are in the game. They lean into that by saying, hey, here are some game systems that we learned from, and specifically what we learned from them and how we built Daggerheart. I thought, first of all, that was just a really classy way to do it, for one. Yep. I'm not going to get into all of that. But one thing that I didn't see them listed on here, and one thing that struck me as I was reading the role play questions that they give you, reminded me a lot of the game Burning Wheel, which it's not a game that we've talked about a lot on here, but it's a game that I think I've mentioned a couple times. First of all, if you want to talk about a thick rule book, that thing could sink ships.
It's bigger than Against the Dark Master?
Yes, because it's all printed on like onion skin. It's 100 pages. And it is a thick 500 pages too. Like it's like George R. Martin read Burning Wheel and said, damn, okay. What spawned me about that was the collaborative way that players build their connections to one another, and specifically how they build who they are. The kind of like the hallmark mechanic of the collaborative world building that Burning Wheel uses is that each character in the game world that's sitting at the table has a unique characteristic that defines them apart from everybody else in the game. So it's something that I've used before on like in my D&D games where it's like everybody has a unique characteristic. So that very much struck me on that, is that these characters are built in ways, and the questions prompt players in ways that say, you are unique. There is something special about you. What is it? And I thought that was hot.
Right. Absolutely. And I'll also jump in just to back up the fact that the character process was easy. I went old school and printed the first few pages that comes in the player packets that came out in the playtest material, which actually gives you like a 30 some odd page thing for everything you need to play the Ranger, period. So you could print it out for yourself. But I only needed like the first 4. And it has a set of instructions right there, step by step, for how to do it. I was done in a reasonable amount of time and built myself a wild-born goblin beastbound ranger and his companion animal, which was cool. He had a boar, and it was a good time. It nice. Made sense. It was easy to follow. I like that they eliminated the big numbers for stats. So like for strength, it's not you have a 20 with a +5. Instead, you just have the plus or minus. You just have the bonus because that's all you need, just like Empowered by the Apocalypse. So you're working with a stat array, and that makes it really easy and puts everybody on the same playing field. So
Yep. Why make people learn 2 numbers when really they only need 1? Yeah. So I am dying to know, though, Lewanika, what character did you build? What class did you pick?
I'm actually interested in what character you thought I built.
I assumed you built a ranger, but I assumed.
What do you think I built?
I have absolutely no idea. I think you probably would have been drawn to the word seraph for a holy person.
I actually did look at a seraph, and I looked at the ranger a lot, and I decided that might be a little too common for me. So I actually built a highborn human guardian vengeance subclass.
Oh, I knew you would go highborn. I should have thrown that out.
Yeah.
Generally, that tracks.
Actually, I can see you playing a Vengeance Guardian. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
At first, I wasn't going to do that, and then I read it. Again, we're doing research, right? And this is a little tip of the hat to 5e players and D&D players. If you're thinking the Vengeance Guardian is like a Vengeance Paladin, while you could narratively describe your character that way, that is not what those words actually mean in Daggerheart. Right. It is a different thing. When they're talking about vengeance, it has a little bit more to do with the way that character mechanically interacts in those conflict and combat scenarios. And then you can do your kind of own thing. And it does flavor itself a little bit more. So I thought of it as a way to build that Guardian type character with a harder edge. And then I leaned into that as I developed the rest of the character.
I can totally see that.
Nice.
Fabulous. All right. I am going to round up round 1 here. And Lewanika, I apologize because I think that I am going to run a dagger straight through your heart with what I'm going to pick here, because I am shocked, Mr. Lewanika Miller, Mr. Background himself, did not talk about the heritage, ancestry, and community aspect of this game, because it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I'll just say this. that was my number one, but it didn't segue with where the conversation was, so I went with my number 2 first.
Sure.
Oh, that's why
I think your number 2 is getting snaked.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. Yeah. You knew that wasn't going to make it out of round 1. Let's be honest here. Like, you understood.
Snake is on. The snake is on.
Yeah. I fully give you permission to go ahead and snake my number 2 if you would like next round. I won't tell you what it is, but that's fine. But yeah, I loved the fact that they took the ancestry part in particular, and like they modified the D&D species rules and just flipped them on their head a little bit. They made the species stuff way more about like where you were born, how you were born, everything like that. Gave it a really interesting ribbon ability. And then that was that. I know that when they expanded kind of the class stuff, that's really where they got into what are the range of damage and everything like that you've got. Like, how does that all fit in and everything? And then taking pieces of ancestry and then community to spell out where are you born versus how did you grow up? Who are the people that you grew up with? What are the things that you grew up doing? And giving, again, 2 ribbon abilities that complement each other like that. This is everything that we have been asking for a background system. It is light. They are interesting. All of the powers are diverse enough to go ahead and be like, what do I really want to play? And none of them feel like, oh, this is the same thing. It doesn't really matter if I'm a fairy or a furball because sure, one's big and one's small, but other than that, they're really the same thing or whatever. Or I'm always going to play a human because the humans have the best mechanical ability, so they'd be stupid not to, that kind of thing. It's just really hot. And I loved the fact that they called robots clanks and they called their frog people ribbits. I thought that was just really fun.
Ribbits
really
I thought was a little
note.
On the nose, but I liked clanks as a reference for Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, totally. Exactly. I think that it works with like the art style that they picked. Because the art style is kind of cartoony. So calling them ribbits, but also making them, at least in the art, it's like that pack ratty type where it's like, you know, a ribbit carries everything on his back sort of thing. I thought was really interesting. Anyway, the ancestry and community system, exactly what we've been asking for how to redo backgrounds for a really long time. And I'm really glad that they did it and that they seem to have got it right.
I can definitely back you up on that. I like it a lot, and I'm hoping they got it right. Until we get into an active playtest, it'll be tough to really decide because I'm looking at the abilities that come with the different species as an example. And some of them raise the question of how balanced could these be? But until I get into actual play, it's tough to tell how much the Clank's ability to add a +1 to one of their experiences at character creation, which based on further reading and how the experiences work, could be very powerful if it's the right experience so that it can apply to a lot of roles. But how that exactly translates over to another species like the daemon and their fearless ability, actually they get 2, they get fearless and dread visage, but their fearless ability lets them choose to mark stress instead of letting the GM gain a fear token when they roll with fear. And fear is the GM's currency to make moves with. So being able to interfere with the GM's currency, that feels really powerful to me. And I'm not sure how it's going to stack up to other things.
I think it stacks up because you get a limited amount of stress, right? And it's like that alien style stress where like the more stress you've got, the harder it is for you to do things. So you are in theory buying more stress every time you buy stress. So
and if you fill your stress meter and take another stress, you mark a hit point. So it can directly impact your health as well.
I would say this to your point, Glenn. I think the difference is I don't think Matt Mercer, based on my limited experience with the games he's run that I've watched, because I am admittedly a fan of Vox Machina, the animated program. I have not watched season after season of the show. I've watched several episodes. I'm a big fan. I used their handbook or helper when I first started playing 5e to learn the mechanics. So I'm a fan of his style and the way he does things, even if I'm not a daily listener, watcher, and observer. But one of the things that I think is important to note is I don't think they care about balance. Very much in the Kevin Symbiota and Riff's kind of way. What is balance in a world that's narrative? There are situations where you outmatch what you're up against, and there's situations where those situations outmatch you. To me, as a GM, balance is more about, do my players feel I am specifically picking on them? Or as a GM, did I let them know, don't go to Zahadum. If you go to Zahadum, you're going to die. If they have heard that for 3 seasons and then they go there before they're ready, I'm sorry, John Sheridan. When you are there, you're about to get your handed to you. That's the way that goes. And so I get the sense, critters, please comment in below. Hit us up on Facebook. Hit us up wherever you're catching this podcast. Let us know if I'm correct in that assessment. I don't think balance is the big issue for him, and likely not a major factor in this game, in the sense that bounded accuracy and WotC 5e tries to balance things.
Balance doesn't have to mean bounded accuracy into anything to that point. And if anybody out there is designing a game with zero concern for balance, I think they're going to fail. And I say that because what I'm talking about isn't specifically whether or not it's going to imbalance the players against the storyteller or the players against their adversaries. It's about whether or not it's going to overbalance one build versus another and create like a broken twink build where now nobody's ever a clank because their ability sucks, but everybody's always a daemon or a this because their ability rocks. Correct. If you don't find some kind of an ability to balance that, and there are players out there that'll do it narratively. I will. I'll play a narratively less powerful character because I think it's fun. But there are a lot of people out there that get their fun by figuring out the way to make the most powerful tune they can. And if you don't strike balance in your character classes and your character abilities when you're doing that, you're going to create a game that leans 100% in a certain class direction for those players. And that takes away from your game.
Yeah, before we move on, and I know we're getting ready to get into our next round here any second now, I will say the differences in definition. I'm talking about encounter balance versus what you're talking about, which is build balance. And they are two very separate equations. And you're absolutely correct. Build balance is critical in any game. You can't have one thing being fundamentally better than the next thing that all players have access to. But
this is an open beta playtest, so we're supposed to find out if something feels imbalanced and let them know.
Yep, exactly. So great point. I will stand corrected on that. That's just a term that has to be defined. Balance in and of itself is not a useful term. You have to decide what part of it you're talking about.
All right, we're going to step aside for a brief promotional break here, and then we'll be back with round 2. Hang on tight. Or hold on gently.
Hold on loosely.
Pink and purple, that's the difference between those two. Pink and purple.
Here at Tabletop Journeys, we've leveled up our game, and we're prepared to make your next roll legendary. We've just started a partnership with FanRoll Dice, and they have over 300 product options to choose from. Gemstone, metal, new liquid core dice, and so much more. Better yet, listeners to the Tabletop Journeys podcast can get 10% off on their orders when they follow the link below and use discount code podcast10. A portion of these purchases come back to us, and this is a great way for you to help support the show.
We are back. So, gentlemen, FanRoll Dice to the ready. Let's see if I can keep from throwing my dice all over the floor. And then let's see who gets to go first in round 2 here.
Big money, no whammies again. Oh, 7.
I am feeling very Pearl Jam today with 10.
Ooh. Last to first with a 13. Just think, last round, a 13 would still have been last, and yet here I am rolling first in round number 2. Exactly where I want to be also, because while, Lewanika, I promised that I would let you snake my number 2 pick, because I'm a liar.
You really didn't want him to, yeah.
comes with the territory, right? So I want to go ahead and take a step back a little bit here, and rather than dive into more of the mechanical aspects of stuff like that, I want to talk a little bit more about what I believe to be the philosophy of putting this book together. When you're putting together a 375-page book or whatever, there has to be some design philosophy. And it's very much exposed to us, I believe, in the first 10, 15 pages of the book, where it goes in depth about sort of the things that you should be against the Dark Master-esque, where it's, these are the movies you should watch, these are the books you should read, here's the music that you should listen to, here's the media that you should enjoy, here are the role-playing games that you should be familiar with if you really want to see what the DNA of Daggerheart is. One of the things that stood out to me in that chapter, though, was their section on the player principles, the things that the players should bring to the table in order to go ahead and get the most out of the experience as possible. We talk about it a lot as like the social contract, right? Where it's all the players are there to play a game and that game is cooperative. And so they should go into the game with that a position or feeling or whatever like that. I think that they take that and they bring it further, right? They talk about the player principles at play here. Be a fan of your character and their journey. And I think that kind of goes to what you were saying about character balance, Glen, where it's like, you can play whatever the frig you want, but if the rules are not balanced, certain characters may be less fun. So they are intending for each kind of build, each kind of everything like that to be fun. Right. And so that tells me that hopefully the rules themselves are balanced, right? Spotlight your allies. Make sure that you are not always hogging the microphone, right? Make sure that you are not always hogging the spotlight. Make sure that you let other people benefit. Play to find out what happens. So don't cheat, right? Play to find out what happens. Let the dice rule the table. Let the narrative rule. Talk through what happens. Role play. It's a role-playing game. Address the characters and address the players. That's a really important rule, I think, that not enough games remind people of. That they are playing characters, but they are also people behind those players, and it's important to go ahead and recognize the duality of that situation. Right? There are times to go ahead and talk out of game to the player, and there are times to make sure that you are being in game to go ahead and talk to the characters. I think that's a really important one that a lot of role-playing games skip over, and I'm glad that they included it. The reference that I made at the end of last episode, hold on gently. Again, I do think that they missed the opportunity to go ahead and quote the 80s lyric, hang on loosely, but such is life, it is what it is. But hang on gently. In other words, enjoy and be a fan of your character and their journey. The storyteller is going to do things. The storyteller's job is to make your journey more challenging. Realize that's the storyteller's job, and that's part of the experience. Your job is to go ahead and figure out the puzzles. The storyteller's job is to put the puzzles in front of you. Enjoy it all together. And then lastly, again, near and dear to my heart, the collaborative aspect of it all. Build the world together. Player input in the nature of the world is just as, if not almost more so important than my input to the world as a storyteller. We are building a world together. We are building a world collaboratively. Lean into it and enjoy it. I thought that this one page is something that I think I could lift for every game that I play forever. And I'm really excited that it's there.
I would go so far as to say this is language that I will be incorporating into my convention session 0 lead-in because it is so well worded. And Josh, curse you for queuing up so many musical references. I'm going to avoid singing 38 Special a second time tonight, but it was really hard for me to hold back.
Let me jump in.
Yeah, please do. I just want to say I wholesale agree with you, Josh. I will be lifting so much of this in what I do. Go ahead, Glenn. Take it away.
Absolutely right, Josh. I think this sheet is fantastic. And it is something that you see at the beginning of a lot of narrative-heavy games, like Powered by the Apocalypse or Illuminated by Lumen.
Yeah, that's
games. And I think part of the reason for that, just to speak to that for a moment, because it might help any of our listeners out there who are trying to make this transition, is because transitioning from a rules-heavy game to a rules-light game does require a change in the player mindset based on what a lot of us have developed over the years. Because one of the things I see most commonly as players who have been 5e players for a long time come to my Powered by the Apocalypse table for Monster of the Week is D&D creates planners within planners who want to analyze the situation and find the exact best way in and the exact best approach. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a whole lot of strategy to D&D. But when you're playing a narrative story like Monster of the Week and you're supposed to be acting like the Winchesters don't stand outside the dark, scary basement that nobody wants to go into because there's bad things down there and something is probably going to get you. And come up with a plan and a discussion and look at every angle. Instead, what they do is they stop and they throw rock, paper, scissors, and whichever one loses says, damn it, and climbs down the hole first.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what you're there for. You're there to find the monster that probably has the advantage, because in Powered by the Apocalypse games, they
often do. Yeah.
And face them anyway, even though you're not completely prepared, even though you haven't figured everything out. And it does require a slightly different mindset. And some of these things help create that, I think.
Very well said. I'm not even going to try to add to it. That is perfect. And rocks, paper, scissors, my turn in the barrel is exactly what we're talking about. Perfectly said.
Yep. Perfect. All right, Lewanika, I guess that means that it is up to you.
Yeah, so Josh, last round, you attempted to snake me, and you were about 49% there, but I actually, while I was going to talk about backgrounds, I was not going to do it strictly on the basis of backgrounds. It was also going to include ancestries, but it was from a different perspective than you went. So you didn't snake me. I still get to talk about what I was going to talk about. I loved the card system for the different parts of the character. One, I think the cards are gorgeous, and this is beta, so this may not be final art, who knows, but I thought they were very descriptive of what we were talking about. And I'm sitting here looking at Demi play, and I see the Underborn, the Wanderborn, the Wildborn for these elements of the game, the communities that folks come from. When I look at the ancestries, there's the Clank, the Daemon, Dracona. If you're trying to do something along the lines of Dragonborn, you're trying to come up with a dragon name, that's a pretty cool name. I was, one, impressed by the names of things they did. That can sometimes be the hardest thing when you're doing a game. Look, I have to go against D&D. I got to call things a different name. Warforged is such a perfect name. I know I'm going to have a mechanical character type. What the heck am I going to call it? Clank is awesome. I think it works really well.
Yeah. And I think that it's a totally different type of robot from a Warforged, too. Let's be honest. Like, something that calls itself a Clank versus something that calls itself a Warforged, totally different creatures.
It could be, but I'm going to call out one of my players at my Eberron table at my last convention. She was playing a Warforged, and she used our collaborative world building tables, picked a character who was working for one of the houses but was on leave. That's that kind of her secret that she was going into that adventure with. But when it came time to introduce herself, she introduced herself as Clank and something. I forget the second part of the name, but it's Captain Clank and such. And so when I actually read this, I'm like, that's freaking cool, because that game was run before Daggerheart was in wide release. So unless she has secret knowledge of Daggerheart stuff, that is something she couldn't know. So I have seen people play Warforged and use that name. They use it as a proper name versus a species name. So I thought it was very indicative, and I thought that was very cool. It's an intuitive name, and that was what I liked. But speaking to the cards themselves, you covered most of the beauty of the ancestries and the communities stuff as far as what they are. What I really liked is the fact that they were cards. Again, when we talk about building a game, and when you talk about building a game ecosystem as far as what are people buying? Are people buying this as a GM? Are people buying this as a player? One of the things that many companies struggle is, and why we get a lot of power creep, players will only buy it if it's player-centric stuff, but GMs need adventures and source books for them, so that you end up getting these things in those source books, diluting the end product. That's tough. We've talked about it on the show several times. By having these player options as cards, and as I'm looking at it, it looks like all the player options are cards. You're setting up a situation where the player options can be sold as cards, whether that's as a PDF that players will buy on various digital media and then print themselves, or they go into their friendly gaming store and buy them that way. Their options are cards. Any GM supplements and things like that might be the various books. So effectively, they've created a system where you don't have to spend millions of dollars to produce these huge books that only a portion of people are going to buy, whereas you can do a card set where you basically pay for the art, you pay for a small amount of printing to get the players the same info. A small card set with 3 or 4 options as an add-on to a digital package or whatever, or just as itself, seems to me a very reasonable way to do that. I don't know if that's exactly what Darrington Press is intending here, but I've heard a couple different folks in the YouTube space talking about that as a possibility, and I'm actually excited to see how that plays out.
So, Josh, do you have anything you want to throw in on cards that supports that before I give a counter opinion?
No, I have just a quick thing to say about cards, and then I'll let you go.
Go ahead.
Let me just toss my quick thing in. First thing is, I agree with you. The cards are gorgeous. I love them. I suspect that they're going to be add-ons when the book comes out, physical print. That just seems like the natural evolution of that. One thing I do wish is that the playtest materials had low ink print versions. That's a really minor quibble, but that would have been a nice addition, something that didn't take so much to go ahead and print. So go ahead, Glenn.
So the cards are the only thing about the playtest material presented so far that I'm not a giant fan of. I'm not going to say I'm against them either. because, again, I want to see how they play and how they work at the table. My biggest immediate, oh my God, they did what? To the cards is online playability. They have made it with that significantly more difficult for me to create an online game and run it for multiple players unless everybody has their own sets, right? If I have the books and I have a player who doesn't have the money to buy anything, I can still invite them to my game and they can still play, right? And I'm not saying that cards are a money grab, but cards that could have been printed as abilities that you write onto your character sheet in the book are basically something that everybody that wants to play a ranger now has to buy a set of cards, because if you don't have the right domains and the right cards and somebody else has the same domain as you can't completely share a deck because you might both want the same ability. And there's a lot of pieces to that make me wonder how well it's going to run on a virtual table and how well anybody else would be able to see the cards to really showcase them to each other's players done that way. Eventually, somebody will write a program that includes all of the cards that'll go into Roll20 or go into something else so that people can just apply them right there in the system itself. But
so that's already been done, and that's on Demiplane. Because you did your stuff pen and paper, old school style, you didn't see that. I built the character, got all the cards, and it's actually on the digital character sheet. So at least for the beta test here, if you're using the free Demiplane resource, all of that things you just mentioned are already covered. So if you're running a game digitally and I don't have physical cards, or I don't have ink in my printer to have physical cards, you could just say, hey, just put your character on Demiplane, and then you'll have all the cards you need with the character you built. As long as it does not become a D&D Beyond where you have to buy X, Y, and Z. So right at this moment, I think we're covered. And if it's the base set is there, so the base things you have, then it's if you want other things, then that might change that perspective. But at least at this stage, everything you just mentioned is already taken care of and addressed.
And there's lots of positives to it, too. If they want to come out with a couple of new abilities for a class, they can just come out with a couple of cards instead of having to reprint books. There's lots of ways that it could go really well. So I'm trying to stay optimistic, and I want to see how it plays out, and I want to see how they market them.
Absolutely. There was a YouTuber, and I can never remember his name, but he does a lot of YouTube shorts with the beard and the bald head, and he's really funny. But
I think it's actually called Shorts, yeah. D&D Shorts.
D&D Shorts, yes. So even though they played it and they had a grand time, loved the game or whatever, he had made the comment that it remains to be seen long-term how well cards work overall. He asked similar questions. Wouldn't it be better to just have it on the sheet? They also were playing physically.
If you did, it makes the sheet more complicated. And I know they were trying to keep the sheet less complicated, and then they can kit the abilities in at the bottom. So I do get the decisions behind it, which is why I'm not straight up being like, I don't like the cards at all. Yeah. Because I can see a lot of positive. I got to see how it plays out.
Yeah, me personally, I would then say, can you please come up with a sheet protector that has slots for the cards in the right spot so I can put my sheet in the thing and then the cards in? Because I think that would be pretty hot. But again, that can be a barrier for entry when gaming is a resource heavy thing. There's a lot of privilege if you have the money to spend on these games. I get that. So I don't want it to be you have to do that to enjoy the game. But if I have those resources and I wish to enhance my experience, I think that could be cool also.
All right, Mr. Myers, time for your last pick to go ahead and round out our episode for this evening. So what do you got?
Oh, and I'm the final question.
The anchor leg, yep.
All right, I got to bring in the rolling mechanics because I really liked them.
I know we haven't talked about these at all.
I'm going to talk about the duality dice, what they mean, and how you use them. Because second to that shift towards the Powered by the Apocalypse or more rules light, there's a bunch of other games in there in that list that Josh mentioned earlier of their inspirations that are rules light games like Powered by the Apocalypse. I've just been playing like a lot of Monster of the Week, so that's the parallels I'm making. But the duality dice are super cool, in my opinion. Basically, as a player, instead of rolling a d20 for your action rolls, which is what they're called in this game, you're going to roll 2d12, which somebody mentioned earlier. But they have to be different colors because each d12 represents an aspect of the duality of the Daggerheart universe and the souls within all of the people that move throughout it. And so one of your dice has to be one specific color, and it's set to your hope die. And the other d12 is a different color, and it is your fear die. So when you roll both of these dice together to make an action roll, to make an ability check, as a lot of people are used to referring to them, you wind up rolling these 2d12, and then you add your relevant stat bonus. So if it's the presence stat, as an example, and you have a +1 for presence, then you would add +1, right? But whether you succeed or fail, you come up with a number in the end, it's 17, and it's a success. But which die was higher, your hope die or your fear die? If your hope die was higher, you have succeeded with hope. If your fear die was higher, you have succeeded with fear, and they have different effects. When you succeed with hope, you get a hope point, and you use hope as a currency within the game to fuel your abilities. When you roll with fear, the GM gets a fear token, which they get to use to activate their adversaries or make moves against the party to change the scenario and the situation throughout the game, to add more threat or danger to the situation. So it brings in that kind of a meta currency for both sides that your dice influence, and the way that it's represented in the game is how much the hope of the world or the fear of the world was impacting the situation just then. But that's hardcore guidance for how the storyteller runs the game. Because when you succeed with hope, you succeed plus a little bit. When you succeed with fear, you succeed, but there's still some kind of a consequence that helps move the story forward, whether you successfully knocked that guard out, but another one comes around the corner, or any number of other things could happen. When you fail with fear or success, it also alters slightly, because you can either mark stress or have the worst complication, because if you fail with fear, that's like everything goes wrong. So how the storyteller describes the action is somewhat dictated by your duality dice rolls, which I think is super cool. As a storyteller, I find it a little intimidating to possibly have to change story beats on every die roll. But again, in a game like this, you're supposed to train yourself to only ask for dice when it matters. So you shouldn't necessarily be rolling as many dice as you do in D&D. But I think the duality dice thing is a super cool concept. And the fact that it brings in those 2d12s, the one downside to that is it does mean you're going to get more of a median result and less of the end, like hitting the 12s all the time. But that works out in your favor too, because the way that you critical with these dice is any time you roll doubles. So while your overall total is going to dip slightly, because with 2d12 you're going to have median results more than when you can roll that 19 on a single d20, but you've got the doubles for every number on the d12, double ones, double twos, double threes, all of those create a critical opportunity. So overall, I was really impressed with what they've tried to do. Again, I want to play it, I want to feel it, I want to see it, I want to sit behind the screen and have to make the decisions for what happens when you succeed with fear before I can truly weigh in. But it's a really cool idea.
I think everything that you said in there is genius, Glenn. The way you tore it down is fantastic. The one point that I want to go ahead and say is talking about having to go ahead and decide how the story is going based on individual dice rolls. Having run a lot of Star Trek adventures with the threat and momentum dice, it's not as complicated or intimidating as it actually sounds like. But I was absolutely with you before I had to run it. I was like, how the heck am I going to go ahead and integrate these things? They just become a part of your toolbox. So they are less intimidating once you get rolling with them.
And later, I realized that I was just being a big scaredy pants, because in Monster of the Week, every die roll is either success, partial success, or everything goes to hell. I have to come up with what happens on partial successes and everything goes to hell all the time already.
I was going to bring up a similar point, but I'll say this. One of the things I was talking about with Bill just last night was the barriers to entry for people running the game. It sounds intimidating. Even when we were starting Star Trek Preservations, one of the fears we had was about threat momentum and how that works. And we actually had some trepidation about that and brought in Al very early on, because we just wanted to make sure we were going to do it right. We'd actually run a game with it. We had been doing it right, realized, we do this anyway through collaborative world building and all the other games we do. And it, like you said, it became part of our toolbox, but it's intimidating to look. And I want to give a big shout out to Glenn here, because reading all of this information, watching probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 hours worth of Daggerheart coverage to date, I did not understand how that worked as well as I now do, just based on what you just told us. So I thank you for our audience members and for anybody who has the opportunity to tune into the show, because as I have been finding out for all of my gaming life, whenever there's a rule that I don't comprehend, give it to Glen.
Give it to Glen.
He will boil that down so it makes sense in this really weird head of mine. Thank you so very much. I now have a really strong understanding of that. And now the thing that I was iffy about and I wasn't going to speak on because I didn't understand it. And I really enjoyed the things I enjoyed and didn't want to say anything that would be particularly negative because I like the things I like so very much about this game. Now that I understand that, I can say something that I really wasn't necessarily going to be able to say when we sat down tonight. And that is, with this game, I am all in on getting to play this game and have it become something that I do at least somewhat regularly, if not all the time. I really like this game, and now understanding how that mechanic works, because I love narrative, because I like changing the story, because I, as I say all the time, get lost in the sauce of the story and going where it flows, a mechanic that gets behind that so players see the mechanics that cause that reaction versus, oh, you just did that because you had that opportunity to do that, is really fundamentally cool, especially if they're new players who are new to role-playing. If they see it's because of the way the numbers rolled. If it goes against them, it goes against them. If it goes for them, it goes for them. But there's some numbers in that. It's easy to say to friends you've known for 20 years, trust me, I'm doing this for the betterment of the story, right? Mm-hmm. At a convention, local game store with people you don't know, harder. The fact that it's built into the mechanics of the game, easier, better. And I really like that I now understand that. Thank you so much.
No worries.
All right, that is our short overview of Daggerheart.
6 takeaways.
Our top 6 takeaways. I can say without any glib or exaggeration that Mr. Spencer Stark should be expecting a message on X from me and momentarily to see if we can go ahead and get him on the show to go ahead and talk even more about Daggerheart, because we'd love to go ahead and have you on and talk about it, maybe see what we can do. If that name sounds familiar, I will say too, just real briefly here as we go ahead and close up, Spencer Stark was the writer on one of my all-time favorite role-playing games. In fact, one of the internet's favorite role-playing games, the silent role-playing game Alice is Missing, which is a fabulous game if you like narrative storytelling. So knowing where that came from, and I saw that listed in the list of sources, man, am I excited to go ahead and dive into this a little bit more here. And speaking of diving into things a little bit more here, I'm also really excited. Next week on the show, we are beginning another game feature with old friend of the show who was on a couple of years ago. Jay Morris is coming back to go ahead and talk about Fae, which is a game that we played here on the air. We're going to play it on the air again. We're also going to talk about what's been happening with Fae over the last couple of years, because it has gone through some evolutions. I know the first time around we played kind of like the dark Fae bad guys. Mm-hmm. This time we get to play the light Fae good guys, and I'm really interested to go ahead and see how that's going to play out here. So really excited, really pumped that Jay is coming back on here. Really excited to be talking to him. So
totally excited too. Yeah. It was a huge blast to play the last time. We'll see how it goes this time.
Absolutely. So
having run games in the same convention room as Jay while he's running is always fun. We've done it a couple times at a couple local cons because he lives somewhat close to me. Mm-hmm. We cross each other's paths frequently, and we'll be doing that again in a couple of weeks. And I'm looking forward to that. So I will not only be gaming with you guys and Jay here shortly, but I'll also be trying to hopefully grab a seat at his table if I can time it right, so I can play live with him as well, because he's a good friend, great person.
You look forward to
amazing game.
We had such a ton of fun playing it the first time around here, so really looking forward to having him back on to go ahead and play it some more. But without any further ado, we'd love to go ahead and hear your thoughts on Daggerheart. Have you read through the material? What are your thoughts on it? Where do you think it's going to go? Have you played it yet? We want to hear all about it. Please take the opportunity to join in the conversation on Facebook, on Blue Sky, on X, on Instagram, you name it, we're there. Follow us and let us know what you think about it. We'd love to go ahead and hear your thoughts. Yeah, and we'll be back next week talking to Jay Morris about Fae and throwing some dice. So until then, we'll talk to you later. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great night.
And by all means, critters, make yourself known. Talk to you later. Have a great night, all.
Peace.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Tabletop Journeys. We would love to hear your feedback on our show today. Join us at www.ttjourneys.com, where you can subscribe to the blog to leave comments and see all the content that we publish beyond the podcast.
You can also stay in touch by subscribing to our Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at TT Journeys. joining our Facebook group, Tabletop Journeys, or by sending an email directly to podcast@ttjourneys.com. Our full episodes come out every week on Friday, and every Tuesday features actual play and gameplay showcase episodes. Looking for early access? You can support the show and get episodes before everyone else at www.patreon.com/ttjourneys. Check it out today and see all the awesome benefits we bring to our supporters.
Lastly, if you're listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, Podchaser, Spotify, or Audible, we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast on that platform. Thank you for listening and for being a part of our growing community. And we bid you fair tides, friends, for legends await.